A virgin hid between a millionaire's legs to escape her ex and accidentally made him fall in love. Zoe Harper stepped into the sleek, high-rise building in the heart of Manhattan, delivery bag swinging from her arm. Hoodie, jeans, messy ponytail. She looked like a freelancer powered by 3 coffees and 2 missed deadlines. Today was supposed to be routine. 1 delivery, 1 floor, 1 goal. Drop off the food and vanish. No eye contact, no questions. But today was anything but routine. As she entered the open office space on the 14th floor, scanning the nameplates for the recipient, a voice called out from behind, and her whole body froze. "Zoe?" She turned slowly. Of course. Worst case scenario, Jake, the ex. The one she'd blocked on every platform imaginable. The one who used to say, "It's not control, it's care." Now he was less than 10 feet away, smiling with that familiar half-smirk and a coffee in hand. "Wait, hey, let's talk," Jake said, stepping toward her. "Nope, nope, nope." Zoe spun on her heel and darted down the right hallway, heart hammering in her chest. If Jake caught up, he'd launch into his usual speech. "We were perfect. Remember our old playlist? I know you miss me." Not a chance. She turned the corner, and there it was, a long desk next to a document scanner. A man in a suit stood by, fully absorbed in a tablet. Without thinking, Zoe dropped to her knees and crouched in the space between his legs, whispering like a spy. "Please pretend you didn't see me." The man froze. "What? Just 30 seconds. That guy's my ex. He follows me everywhere. I know this is super weird, but..." Footsteps echoed from the hallway. "Jake." Zoe held her breath, clenching the food bag like a life vest. The man glanced around, then lowered his tablet, not saying a word. "Excuse me," Jake's familiar voice rang out. "I'm looking for a girl. Red hoodie, ponytail. Ran past here?" The man replied, calm and composed. "She ran toward the elevators. Looked like she was in a hurry." Jake muttered a quick thanks and walked off. Zoe exhaled, finally lifting her head. The man looked down at her, a mix of surprise and intrigue on his face. She stood up, brushing off her jeans, awkwardly smiling. "I'm not crazy, I swear. It was an emotional emergency, a survival instinct, like in an indie film or something." He raised an eyebrow. She extended her hand. "Zoe Harper, freelance delivery, full-time unemployed." He took her hand, lips twitching. "Adrian Wells, head of innovation, and accidental human shelter." Zoe froze. That name, that ridiculously familiar name. Her eyes widened. Adrian Wells, the media tech genius who never showed up in interviews but somehow dominated every tech headline. "Of course," she muttered. "The universe never misses a chance to humiliate me." Adrian let out a soft chuckle. Quick, low, but genuine. "Well," he said, "that was an interesting introduction." "Not exactly how I hope to be remembered," Zoe replied, still stunned. Adrian wasn't exactly sure what had just happened in the past 2 minutes, but one thing was clear. This girl, Zoe Harper, was unlike anyone he'd ever met. In a world full of people who followed the rules, her response was memorable, calm in the weirdest scenario, bold enough to act, not even slightly apologetic about being strange. After Jake left, Zoe stood up, brushed off her jeans, and mumbled something like, "Maybe hiding in the basement would have been smarter." Adrian remained still, watching her, like he was analyzing an unexpected variable in a perfectly calculated formula. "Have you ever worked in a high-pressure environment?" he asked. Zoe raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me that after I literally crawled under your desk?" "Exactly because of that," he replied. There was a pause. She looked at him and laughed. "You're blunt." "This is an offer," Adrian continued. "I'm hiring a temporary assistant for my innovation team, and I need someone who thinks fast, acts faster, and isn't afraid of breaking the norm." Zoe was quiet. She needed work, desperately. But this wasn't just a job. It felt like something else, an opportunity, a sharp turn on a path she hadn't expected. "I'm not sure I really fit in with office culture," she said softly. "That's exactly why I think you might," Adrian replied. She looked at him, then nodded. Okay, 3 months. I'll give it a shot. Zoe still wasn't sure why she agreed to return to that building the next morning. Maybe it was the strangest job invitation she'd ever received. I need someone who doesn't pass out under a conference table. Or maybe it was Adrian's expression. Not skeptical, not condescending. Just curious, with a hint of amused disbelief. So there she was, standing in the elevator in a borrowed blouse, low ponytail, and the kind of look that says, 3 months, temporary. No big deal. When she stepped onto the 18th floor, she was led into a glass-walled office with sleek furniture, large windows, and Adrian. Still calm, still white shirt, blazer draped over the chair. Good morning, he said, motioning for her to sit. I'm here as promised, and this time I didn't hide under any tables. He gave a small smile. Good. Adrian tapped the holographic screen in front of him and began his briefing. We're building an innovation unit, small, agile, focused on creative solutions in digital media. But we're lacking energy and flexibility. Zoe tilted her head. And that's where I come in? Exactly, he said without hesitation. I need someone to handle planning, logistics, scheduling, last-minute chaos, but most importantly, someone who doesn't panic under pressure. Zoe raised her hand like she was in grade school. Yesterday, I was hiding between your legs. I think that counts as creative crisis management. Adrian chuckled, a short, dry ha that lasted all of 2 seconds. Precisely, he said. Now your experience? Zoe exhaled. I started studying UX design, but put it on hold to take care of my mom. Since then, I've done whatever I could. Delivery gigs, document formatting, customer service, bridal party decoy, makeup model. He simply nodded, not interrupting, not judging. Flexible, adaptable, unconventional, he summarized. I prefer versatile, but unconventional works too, she smiled. Adrian reached into his drawer and handed her a slim folder. This is a 3-month contract. If you like the job, and I like working with you, we'll extend it. Zoe opened the folder, skimmed the first few lines, then looked up. Is this real? Unless you're still passed out on the elevator floor, he replied, handing her a pen. She paused for a second, then signed. Done. Now you've got an assistant with quick reflexes and a mild tendency toward chaos. And I've got an interesting experiment for the next 90 days, Adrian said. She raised an eyebrow. Do you usually call your employees experiments? Only the ones who've hidden under tables, he replied coolly. On her first official day, Zoe arrived nearly 45 minutes early. Not because she was overly eager, but because she'd set her alarm wrong, trying to switch it from freelancer time to real office hours. The office was quiet in the early morning. Soft sunlight angled through the giant windows, reflecting off the polished floors. Zoe walked past a row of minimalist desks, each perfectly organized with a single coffee cup, a mini photo frame, and absolutely no funny stickers in sight. This is a different planet, she mumbled, clutching her backpack. Adrian appeared at exactly 8:01, like a human calendar reminder. White shirt, gray tie, immaculate hair. He nodded briefly at her. You're early. Alarm malfunction, Zoe confessed. But also, I figured I'd need time to mentally prepare before getting eaten alive by Excel and fluorescent lights. He pointed to a desk near the window. This is yours. Laptop's preloaded with the internal system. Miriam will brief you during the 9 a.m. meeting. Miriam is project director, doesn't do small talk, loves silence and on-time deadlines. Sounds delightful, Zoe said with a nervous grin. 9 a.m. First meeting. Zoe sat in a glass conference room, blinking at a massive screen filled with 3D charts, confusing terminology, and the phrase content interaction conversion rate. Miriam started the presentation in a tone that could rival premium AI. Zoe took notes on instinct, though half the words felt like they belonged in another language. Nico, the guy with glasses across from her, subtly slid a strawberry candy her way and whispered, "Just pretend to understand. Everyone does that the first 2 weeks." Zoe gave a grateful nod, pocketing the candy like it was survival gear. For the rest of the morning, she successfully avoided spilling water on the printer, barely, emailing the entire company by mistake, just a director named Bruce, and breaking a coffee mug, only a minor spill on Adrian's draft notes. He said nothing, just handed her a napkin and kept reading his report. By lunchtime, while others trickled out, Zoe was still at her desk, battling the internal scheduling software, which felt suspiciously like learning to code. Adrian walked past, paused. "Lunch?" Zoe looked up, surprised. "I thought lunch here was every person for themselves." "Usually, but I'm heading to the executive kitchen for coffee, and you look like you're about to chew your keyboard." Zoe laughed and stood. "Well, you clearly understand your assistant." The executive floor was sleek, like something out of a sci-fi set. Adrian handed her a juice bottle, grabbed his black coffee. "You surviving?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "I feel like I'm about to accidentally knock over a server or call an investor uncle. Just don't set the ceiling lights on fire. They're expensive." She laughed, and in that moment, surrounded by steel and glass, something warm flickered. "You know," she said, gazing out the window, "yesterday I just wanted to drop off a lunch and dodge my ex. Now I have a badge, a desk, and a seat next to a guy who runs half the building. That's a twist." Adrian looked at her a beat longer than usual. "Sometimes the unexpected takes us exactly where we need to go," he said. She smiled. And for a brief second, even chaos had its own kind of order. When they returned to the office after lunch, Adrian said nothing, but his mind was spinning. Zoe Harper, the girl who'd once hidden between his legs like a scene out of a B-movie, turned out to have a rare ability. She didn't panic when things got messy. She adapted fast, responded faster, and most importantly, she wasn't afraid to be wrong. When he handed her a folder containing next week's meeting schedule, Zoe scanned it for a few seconds and asked, "Would you like me to reorganize it so the meetings with similar themes are grouped? That way, you won't have to shift mental gears so much." Adrian paused, surprised. "Can you?" Zoe shrugged. "Just need to know who gets grumpy when their time slot changes." She pulled out a highlighter, sketched a revised schedule, color-coded by topic, and reordered sessions for better flow. All of it done in silence, just the scratch of marker on paper and quiet keystrokes in between. Adrian stood there watching. No one trained her to do that. No one asked her to. But Zoe just did it. Like instinct kicked in. He stepped back to his desk, still silent. But in his mind, something had already shifted. She wasn't just the accidental assistant. She was the variable his system needed, even if the system didn't know it yet. Late Thursday afternoon, Adrian turned to Zoe and said, "Come with me to the 22nd floor. I need to review a financial brief." Zoe stood up automatically, still holding her notepad. "This isn't a trap, right?" "Only if you're afraid of heights," Adrian replied as he headed toward the elevator. They stepped into the glass capsule, a high-tech elevator offering a full panoramic view of New York City. Zoe shifted to the corner, lightly gripping the metal rail. "This much glass makes me feel like a zoo exhibit." "It's part of the design," Adrian replied, "transparent and high-end. And incredibly stressful." The elevator started its smooth ascent. LED lights pulsed along the frame as the floors ticked by. Floor 18, floor 19, floor 20. Beep, beep, blink. The lights flickered. The engine rumbled slightly. Then, complete stop. Zoe's head shot up. "Wait, what just happened?" Adrian checked the control panel. Black screen, frozen system. "Looks like a small electrical glitch. I'll call it in." He opened a side panel, pulled out the radio. "This is Adrian Wells. We're stuck in elevator C." A few seconds of static, then a reply. "Mr. Wells, we're experiencing a temporary system issue. Recovery in progress. Might take a few minutes." Zoe took a deep breath. A few minutes trapped in a glass box mid-air. Perfect. Adrian looked calm. "We've got full oxygen. You're fine." "I'm not worried about air. I'm worried because I start talking a lot when I panic." "I noticed." Silence. Zoe slid to the floor back against the glass. "If I start rambling, please don't fire me." "I'll consider it." She shot him a look. "Okay, real question. Why did you hire me?" Adrian paused. Because you stay calm in chaos. Because your instincts are sharp. Because you're interesting. Interesting as in clinical case study or unpredictable wildcard? Both, he replied, eyes focused on the hazy skyline. Zoe gave a soft laugh. Can I be honest? I pegged you as the type who lives alone, schedules plant watering, and never cries during movies. Not accurate, he said. Oh? I don't water plants. I let the system do it. She burst out laughing. That's the most CEO answer I've ever heard. And you, he continued, seem like someone who says everything she thinks. Only 95% of the time. The other 5% I keep to avoid getting fired. He tilted his head. And if I asked what's in that 5%? Zoe paused. You seem like someone carrying a whole universe inside, hidden behind a composed mask. And I think, under all that order, there's chaos you're trying hard to control. Silence. Adrian looked at her. Longer than usual. He didn't deny it. Am I right? She asked softly. More than I'd like to admit. At that moment, the lights flickered back on. The elevator gave a soft jolt and resumed its climb. Zoe exhaled. End of elevator drama. It was interesting, Adrian said. You like the way I talk at 300 words per minute? Trained skill, 3 siblings, 1 TV, no remote. The elevator stopped. Doors opened. They stepped out. But in the still hallway of the 22nd floor, something between them had shifted. Not because they said too much, but because they stopped hiding so much. When the elevator stopped at the 22nd floor, Zoe stepped out first, but turned back just briefly, as if her eyes needed one last check that what happened was real. Adrian followed behind, silent, but his steps were slower than usual. As the doors slid closed behind them, the hallway seemed to still. No blinking lights, no buzz of the system, just the golden light of late afternoon filtering through glass, stretching shadows across the cool gray floor. Zoe turned. Their eyes met. There was nothing dramatic, no swelling music. Just 2 people on a quiet high floor carrying unsaid things in their silence. Her smile came first. Small, subtle, like even she wasn't sure why it was there. Then his, the tiniest curve of the lips. No words, just enough to shift the tone in his eyes. Something moved between them. Slight, but real, like electricity, not loud, just quietly alive. Zoe turned away first. I guess next time we should pick a different elevator, Adrian replied, still standing where he was. Or go together, just not at rush hour. She glanced back, laughed softly. Noted. They walked side by side, no more words. But both of them knew. The line between work and something else had started to blur. After that day, neither of them brought it up. But something had changed, in the way they looked at each other, in the pauses between words, in how the silence started feeling familiar. Then one morning, as Zoe was pinning notes to the meeting board, Adrian walked over and asked, almost casually, "Are you free this Friday night?" The question came just as Zoe was deciding between almond and oat milk at the office coffee machine. Adrian's voice was calm, the same tone he used to confirm meeting times. She turned, squinting. "Did I double book something?" "No, dinner, with my parents." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "They're hosting a small gathering. I thought it made sense for you to come as the team's representative." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Me? Not Nico, the guy with the MBA? Or Miriam, who dresses like a courtroom drama star?" "No one else has ever hidden under my conference table," Adrian said, completely serious. She laughed out loud. "Okay, fine. But if your mom asks why I've played a fake bride before, I'm blaming you. Just don't blame me for the burnt cookies." Friday evening, Zoe stood outside a classic 2-story home in New Jersey. The early autumn air was crisp, scented with dry leaves and distant apple pie. She took a deep breath, holding a bottle of red wine and a box of cookies. The third batch she'd baked after burning the first 2. Adrian opened the door in a white shirt, V-neck sweater, and dark coat. Clean, soft around the edges. Nothing like the CEO armor she'd gotten used to. "You don't look very executive tonight," she teased. "My mother's influence," he said. Come in before she assumes you fled. Dinner started politely, almost too politely. Adrian's father, George, was warm, curious, easy to talk to, but his mother, Evelyn, had a gaze sharp enough to slice through small talk. "So Zoe," she began, "you seem versatile, but what did you do before joining this creative team?" Zoe straightened. "I studied UX, then paused to care for my mother. After that, freelance work, deliveries, translating, temporary assistant gigs. Once I posed as a bride for a wedding trial event." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Trial? Mock ceremony, guests, cake, no legal papers." 3 seconds of silence. Then George laughed. Rich, real. Zoe flushed but smiled. "I know it sounds weird, but it taught me how to handle people. Kind of like working for someone with a detailed plan who pretends it's improvisation." Adrian nearly choked on his wine. For the first time that evening, he laughed, genuinely. Zoe turned to him, mock serious. "See? You do laugh." He shook his head, but he didn't take his eyes off her for the rest of the meal. Later in the living room, Zoe shared stories. Odd jobs, cranky customers, once pretending to be a therapist for a sleepless child. They all laughed, even Evelyn, just enough to soften the edges. As they were leaving, Adrian handed Evelyn the box of cookies. "Zoe baked these. Might go well with your tea." Evelyn took it, glanced at Zoe. "Thank you. And thank you for not bringing a bouquet down the aisle." Zoe burst out laughing. "Maybe next time." On the ride home, the car was quiet. Zoe leaned her head against the window, watching the street lights flicker past. She turned. "Be honest. Why me?" Adrian didn't speak right away. His fingers tapped the steering wheel, slow, steady. "Because you make me laugh," he said softly. "And I don't do that often." Zoe looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Not guarded, not clever, just real. "I'm glad I could give you that." After that dinner, Zoe expected to slip back into the usual routine. Meetings, emails, 3 coffees a day. But something had shifted, not the job itself, but the way she felt, about herself, and about someone who no longer felt just like the boss. It was Wednesday afternoon, the office starting to empty when Adrian walked up to Zoe's desk. "Got 15 minutes?" he asked, voice gentler than usual. "For coffee or for crisis?" Zoe replied, eyes still on her screen. "Coffee, but not here." They ended up at a small cafe 2 blocks away. No whiteboards, no meeting countdowns. Just warm lights and the scent of cinnamon waffles. Zoe stirred her latte, staring into the milk foam like it held answers she couldn't name. Adrian spoke first. "I saw your old UX design mock-ups, the ones in the folder labeled, 'Do not submit.'" Zoe looked up, startled. "How did you even—" "iCloud. You forgot to sign out on the meeting room Mac last week." Zoe covered her face. "Oh God, CEO-level privacy invasion." "Sorry," Adrian smiled. "But honestly, they're better than you think." Zoe didn't answer right away. Then quietly she said, "I used to think I'd be a designer forever. Then Mom got sick. I dropped out. Everyone else kept running forward, and I stayed behind." She looked up, gave a small, wry smile. "Since then, I've felt like a placeholder in other people's lives. Not the first choice, just the emergency contact when something goes wrong." Adrian didn't rush in to reassure. He just looked at her, not pitying, not fixing, just present, like every word she said was worth holding. "You're not a plan B," he said slowly. "I saw you before you fell off course." Zoe froze. Her eyes blurred a little, not from sadness, but from hearing something no one had ever said that plainly before. Not someone who knew her past, someone who believed in who she could have been, and maybe still could be. "I'm not sure I can go back," she whispered. "You don't have to go back," Adrian said. "Just keep going, from where you are." Zoe laughed softly, eyes still shining. "You always talk like life is simpler than it is." Not simpler, just not as impossible as you've convinced yourself it has to be. When they left the cafe, dusk had fallen. Zoe pulled her coat tighter, walking beside him in silence. Among the noise of traffic and city lights, something was quietly growing. Not love, Not yet, but trust. And sometimes it starts with a cup of coffee and no deadlines attached. That morning, the boardroom was all bright overhead lights and polished silence. A massive LED screen covered the wall. 3 major investors sat across from Adrian, unreadable expressions, hands resting on printed briefs. Zoe stood at the control table, taking a slow breath. This was the quarterly pitch, where every click, every slide had to be flawless. She opened the folder labeled Presentation Final. Her hand trembled slightly. Click. But instead of the expected report, the screen lit up with an unreleased UX prototype, a completely new product interface, something the team hadn't pitched, hadn't made public. The room froze. Adrian turned toward her, his eyes sharp, stunned. Zoe felt the air leave her lungs, her face flushing cold. I'm sorry, she stammered. Wrong file. I'll switch it right. Before she could react, one of the investors, a short-haired Asian woman, tilted her head. Is that an extension of your current platform? Adrian paused. It's a concept in early internal development. And the designer? Zoe stood frozen. She didn't know if she should back away or disappear entirely. Adrian answered firm and clear. Zoe, she built that prototype while assisting the creative team. The woman smiled. I'm impressed. This is the direction the market is moving. Why hasn't this been presented? Adrian exhaled slowly. Because I wasn't ready to take that risk. She nodded. But she was. Zoe forgot how to breathe. Then the investor began to speak. Not in frustration, but with curiosity. And slowly, everything shifted. Adrian wasn't used to losing control, but this time losing control opened a door, one he hadn't dared to walk through himself. He watched as they leaned forward, took notes, asked about user flow and interaction. The tension in his shoulders slowly eased. In its place, something surprising emerged. Hope. When the short-haired woman smiled and said, if she's behind this concept, then your company has more than just infrastructure. It has vision. Adrian answered softly, I know. For the first time that morning, he didn't feel the need to manage the narrative. He just needed to step aside and let Zoe shine. The meeting ended with a round of quiet applause and a meaningful handshake. When everyone had filed out, Zoe remained frozen, staring at the console, as if willing time to rewind. Adrian walked over. She started to explain. I didn't mean to. I just... Stop, Adrian said. Not harsh, just calm. He looked at her, direct and steady. You acted when everyone else hesitated, and because of that, we now have a real shot. Zoe stood speechless. She didn't know if she wanted to cry, laugh, or hug someone, but in that moment, she knew she wasn't in the background anymore. The unexpected success that day had the whole team buzzing, and Zoe thought, maybe finally things were falling into place. But sometimes what draws attention isn't your talent. It's what people think they see. The whispers started after the gala night. No one said it outright, but the stares, the careful greetings, the shift in tone, they were enough for Zoe to know. She had become the subject of untitled emails and unusually long coffee breaks. I heard she met his parents. She must be special. Or special in another way? Zoe didn't flinch. She was used to being misunderstood. But this time, it wasn't the rumors that stung. It was Adrian's silence. He said nothing, no clarification, no look that said, ignore them. In meetings, he was professional, polite, but his gaze no longer lingered on her. His voice no longer softened when he said her name. And worst of all, the distance. Unspoken, growing, undeniable. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Zoe walked into his office, shutting the door behind her. You're avoiding me, she said. Calm, not angry, just tired. Adrian looked up, hesitant. Zoe, this isn't not the right time for truth? He fell silent, one hand resting on the open report. I'm not stupid, Adrian. I know what's happening. What I don't know is why you won't say anything. At last he looked at her, mask gone. Because you're a distraction I can't afford. Zoe stood still. Her heart didn't break. It just folded in, like something quietly refused. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. "At least that's honest." "Zoe, it's fine, I understand." Then she turned and left. No pause, no tears. Not yet. But when the elevator doors closed, her chest ached with the weight of goodbye. She sent her resignation that night. No explanation. Just, "Thank you for the opportunity." Adrian read the email alone in his office, lit only by desk light. He read it twice. 3 times, but didn't reply. Because he thought he'd done the right thing. Chosen professionalism, avoided complications, kept things clean. Only when she was no longer there, no more coffee cups, no more quietly clever remarks, did he realize he hadn't chosen right. He had just chosen safe, and the cost was something he couldn't get back. The office was missing Zoe. No more soft keyboard clicks in the early mornings, no warm coffee placed quietly by Adrian's desk, no steady voice in meetings, calm but clear. Adrian felt the absence more than he expected. He couldn't sleep, spent long nights alone in his high-rise apartment, city lights flickering against bare walls. Reports still came in, projects moved forward, the company kept growing. But inside him, everything stalled. When his father was hospitalized after a minor stroke, Adrian sat in the hospital hallway alone, surrounded by beeping machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic. He looked exhausted. The usual composure was gone. His eyes were dark, distant. Then came soft footsteps. Zoe appeared. No warning, no flowers, no grand gesture. Just a gentle gaze and a paper bag of coffee. She sat down beside him. Didn't ask, "Are you okay?" Didn't say, "I heard." She just sat. They stayed silent for a long time. Not awkward silence, but the kind that feels like an answer when words fall short. Adrian turned to her, his voice rough, stripped of performance. "I thought keeping my distance would be safer, that I wouldn't hurt anyone that way. But really, I was hiding." Zoe didn't respond right away. She looked at him. No blame, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. "I don't want to hide anymore," he said, holding her gaze. "Not from you, not from myself." For the first time in months, Adrian reached for her hand. Not rushed, not demanding. Zoe gently closed her fingers around his. Not as forgiveness, but as a beginning. No grand promises, no neat plan. Just 2 people, and an honesty that no longer needed to hide. After that quiet afternoon at the hospital, they didn't need many words, but something had shifted. No more distance, no more pretending to be fine. And then a new project emerged, as if the universe itself was offering them a chance to start again. This time, for real. 6 months later, Zoe officially stepped into her role as Director of User Experience, a title she once thought belonged to someone else. But now she no longer questioned it. Not her ability, not her place, and certainly not the man walking beside her. At the International Tech Conference in Paris, she and Adrian took the stage together before a packed auditorium. Adrian opened with strategy and data. Sharp, composed, deliberate. Zoe followed with user journeys. Intuitive, human, vibrant. They didn't need to look at each other to sync. Every step, every cue already lived in rhythm. No longer boss and assistant, no longer rumored. But truly, partners. That evening beneath the Eiffel Tower, the golden lights dusted the cobblestones like soft mist. Adrian paused, holding her hand. "I used to think love would completely mess up my life," he said, eyes flickering with shy honesty. "And I was right," Zoe laughed. "Then why keep going?" He slipped a hand into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, simple ring. "Catching the light just enough, because I want you to turn my whole life upside down. And never stop." Zoe blinked, her laughter catching in a breath of tears. "As long as you never call me a functional associate again." They laughed. A hug, a kiss, and a new beginning. No longer temporary, no longer careful, just love, steady enough to carry them forward, together. Somewhere between chaos and clarity, they'd found something worth keeping.